Hello? Nope.
Working? Make a lot micro.
Hello, everybody.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to what is our fourth annual debate between the Monash Philosophy Society and the Monash Christian Union. Tonight, trying to answer the topic, Christianity or secularism? Which framework provides a more compelling understanding of justice? Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. I will say at the outset, this event is being live streamed on YouTube. So if you would like to watch it back, you can head to the Monash Christian Union's YouTube channel or get that link via their socials.
It's good being here again for another year. I hope you guys are excited. I think we have a packed house, which is pretty cool. We have people sitting in aisles already. You're welcome. Get comfy. But my name is Marnus, and I'm a fourth year science and education student here at Monash Uni.
And I'm Liam. I'm a second year arts and science student here at Monash.
And we have the privilege of being your MCs tonight. So if you're wondering where, what, how, and why, we will hopefully answer your questions. But first, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations, on which land we are on now. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I also want to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders here with us today. Now, before some logistics, I want to quickly say why we are here doing a debate. The reason for the debate is we want to encourage discussion. Both MPS and Monash CU, MCU, think this is a really important topic. We think we should be able to discuss these things in a civil manner, in a way that we can actually hear each other's opinions. So the heart behind this is to open discussion. And we hope that you guys can see that, hear that, and support that tonight.
Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you need the toilet at any time, it's just out the door you came in and underneath the stairs. And I'm sure this goes without saying, but during the formal sections of the debate, we ask that everyone please refrain from interrupting. There will be time for questions afterwards and discussion in the foyer. So if you can keep all of your brilliant ideas quiet and save it for those times while we let the experts make their arguments.
Another one, please keep your phones on silent. This would be a good idea to take it out and make sure it's on silent, just so we respect our debaters who've been preparing very long and hard. And it wouldn't be a debate without a good Q&A. So we will have a Q&A later in the night. There will be opportunity for you to submit your questions. And for now, though, we'd maybe suggest if you have a notepad or a phone that can take notes on it, note down your questions so you can submit them a bit later in the night. Afterwards, we'll also have donuts and tea for you guys out in the foyer. We really hope this is more than just a grab and go. We hope that you guys can stay and continue these thoughts and discussions you've had with other people.
Okay. Now that we've gotten all the preliminaries out of the way, it's time to introduce all of the important people in the stage, starting with Salome, who will be our moderator for tonight. She has plenty of experience debating, as all of those who were here last year will know. She argued for the Christian side, but she has assured us she will be very fair and neutral for tonight, and we're sure we'll do a brilliant job at keeping the debate running smoothly. Moving on to the debaters, on the arguing the case for secularism, we have Joshua Chang, who is a third law arts and science student here at Monash. Third year law and arts student, I apologize. And his favorite thinker is the logical positivist A.J. Ayer. And secondly, we have Andrew Gaulk, an alumnus of Monash University who graduated with specializations in literary studies and classics, and whose honours thesis was on the topic of narrative technique in competitive debate. His favorite thinker is William Shakespeare.
And for the case, arguing for the case of Christianity, is William Lardner. He's first year law and politics, philosophy and economics. Wowee, that's impressive. Here at Monash as well, his favourite thinker is C.S. Lewis. And we have Bella Millardo. And we have Bella Millardo as well. She's a final year business, marketing and arts philosophy student here. Her favourite thinker is Blaise Pascal. Yeah. But I'll now hand over to Salome as we get started.
Thanks, Marnus. Hi, as you all know, I'm Salome. I'm going to be your moderator for tonight. So a few things off the bat. Obviously, I'd like to extend my welcome to you. It's really wonderful to see all of your faces here. And I think it speaks to the fact that this is a really interesting topic and there's a lot of cool things that can be discussed. And so with that in mind, what I hope for tonight is that we're all able to engage in a really civil and respectful manner. So please don't say anything during speeches. Obviously, you are all adults. I know that you can conduct yourselves in a way that allows for really fruitful discussion, so please do. I expect that of the debaters as well. I will be timing, so you may hear knocks or claps, but then also I may tell debaters to rein it in if I feel like they're going on tangents and or getting overly adversarial. In terms of what this night will look like, we're going to start out with opening statements, which will ideally be 7.5 minutes. So you'll hear one clap at 7.5 minutes, but I will let them kind of finish their statements up until 8, in which I'll give them 2 claps. Then we're going to have a break for 10 minutes, and then we'll break off into cross-examination. Cross-examination is half an hour, but it is segmented into 5-minute blocks. So one team will ask a question, which will take around 30 seconds. The opposing team will then have about 3 minutes to respond, and then there is a sort of right of reply for about 2 minutes from the team that originally asked the question. We'll then break for a quick intermission there as well, and then jump into Q&A. Apart from that, though, I'd like to welcome up Bella from Monash Christian Union. Or is it Will? Will, wonderful.
Okay. This is like...
Ooh, I apologize for that. If God was indifferent to injustice, by what reason did he send his most holy and beloved Son, Jesus, to his most cruel and accursed death on a cross? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight, we seek to present a foundation of justice built on God, on Jesus. A God who indeed is not indifferent, but rather is deeply grieved by injustice and rather pushes for justice. I'll be talking about the broader overarching frameworks of Christian justice, while Bella will be talking about how we implement this in our worlds. It can be useful to think of one aspect of justice as accountability and consequence. How people are held responsible for what they have or haven't done. And consequently, how we examine the consequences of rewards, retribution, or restoration. But of course, when we look at the world, things start to get messy. Monash might find great justice in fining me for parking at red at 9:55. If you're John Wick, this might mean enacting your own form of consequences on crime syndicates who have killed your dog. But unfortunately for many, the term justice can be more elusive or tenuous, perhaps even a rationale for murder, conquest, or revenge. In Christianity, everything is accounted for and everyone is accountable by an all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful, and indeed all-just God. Accountability is not just in the physical outcomes or consequences, but also your heart, your intention, your soul at work. It means justice is enacted by a God who sees all things, both revealed and hidden. A hope that despite this mess, things will finally be made right. This doesn't mean that we don't try to do anything here on earth, but this inevitably becomes an insubstantial and incomplete justice. Instead, we believe this foundation should be oriented towards God's justice, upholding human dignity, loving others unconditionally, promoting hospitals, charity, and equality. Secularism has no such claim of such an objective orientation, but rather wanes and withers to the whims of people, power, and corruption. Without God, those who get away with wrong remain unpunished. Tyrants or dictators can rule and have only themselves to be accountable to. Justice is to the extent that you're caught, convicted, punished, and that you even have a just judicial or social system in the first place. And I think possibly even just having done a semester of law, these fall short, even if they do exist. Systems crumble, power shifts, new leaders replace old ones, money can oppress people in new ways. What's happening to stop this? John D. Rockefeller, probably the most person with the most wealth in the contemporary modern world, says that the best way to make money is when blood is flowing through the streets. How can we stop this? Yet, in Christianity, we are consistently held accountable to an all-just and all-loving God. A term that's often thrown around, used a lot, is sin. But what does this actually mean? Sin in Greek, harmatia, is missing the mark, like in archery. Missing the target. Means relying on yourselves to be the final arbiter and sole whims of your desires, your will, your justice. Denying God's will and making that will your own. And of course, we don't want to confront the consequences of our accountability, the consequences of our actions or our accountability. Too often, our reactions to God's justice are so hostile precisely because we're so unwilling to relinquish these desires and ego. If we're held accountable to a God who is all good, all love, all just, how far we have all fallen. We constantly and consistently say no to God, to goodness, to love, mercy, justice. We fall short. We fail, we lie, we steal, we cheat, we envy, we will harm, we want pride. We separate ourselves from God, the origin of all love, goodness, joy, hope, life. Missing the target of God means missing all that is good, right, and just. Humans have been given a conscience, a glimpse of the divine law in our hearts, a sense of some basic rights and wrongs, so we can be convicted and recognize how far we are from hitting that target, how often we reject this conscience, manipulate the words justice, right, and wrongs to our own ideas, our whims, desires that satiate our own egos and that corrupt the world. To recognize how in need we are of a Saviour, how in need we are for Christ. Justice can often be described as getting what we deserve. Mercy, not getting what we deserve. And yet grace, getting a gift that we indeed do not deserve. In Christ's crucifixion, we see the collision of perfect justice and perfect mercy, grace. God did not overlook sin, he took it upon himself, fulfilling justice. He did so not by condemning us, but by condemning sin through himself in our place. A price had to be paid for sin to achieve justice. That price was God himself, Jesus. And so we do not get what we deserve. Sin gets what we deserve. And yet we are still given the gift of Jesus, a greater justice. A perfect union with a perfect God necessitates being perfect of yourself. Anything otherwise would be a contradiction. But of course, here lies the problem. No one is perfect, not even on the same playing fields. No one even comes close. Yet, when we choose to trust on Jesus, deny our will, deny ourselves, carry up our cross, we are prescribed a seal of perfection. Not because of our merit or anything that we have inherently done, but because of his grace, a perfect God took on our own imperfections, our sin, upon himself, so that we can be declared blameless. God chose not only to suffer with us, but for us. The ultimate compassion, from Latin cum patior, to suffer with, to suffer for. In Christ's resurrection, justice prevails. Sin, darkness, death itself has been conquered. Hope that while this world is unjust, Jesus will come again to set everything right and decree true justice. I think we can find deep purpose and comfort that God, who is all love, looked upon the empty plane of the universe and declared that it is not complete unless you are created. And that God, in his love and goodness, desires to live in forever unity with this creation, with you. We are given a free will to choose or reject God, and yet we tragically choose to trust on our own will, our own justice, rather than on God. God cannot contradict himself. Perfect unity of love and evil cannot coexist, nor can God, being fully just, overlook our wrongs. Through our fallen worlds, our insatiable desires and egos, we can be redeemed through Christ, so that we can live with him unshackled by our sin and shortcomings, hitting the bullseye, justice through grace. Secularism may provide some attempts of enacting justice in this world, but they fall short compared to the God of justice, who not only punishes wickedness, but redeems the wicked. Secularism cannot provide a compelling framework for true accountability, nor the capacity for true redemption, forgiveness, or hope, because it relies on ourselves and our inaccurate aim to hit the mark that sends arrows into the hearts of people and ourselves, rather than on the heart of God. Thank you. Oh, sick.
Thank Will for their speech, and now welcome up Josh.
It's fine, we're prepared, I promise.
All right, is this working? Yep, easy. Seems to be unable to unbuckle this very simple contraption. Okay, got it. Ladies and gentlemen, justice is not abstract. We feel it in our life every day, and we understand injustice through the heartfelt wrongs of the world. It is in the sting of a friend's betrayal. It is in the hurt of a loss too soon. It is in the drop felt in our stomach when we hurt someone we love. It is in our tears at the suffering of others near and afar. These responses are from an inborn sense that the world should be fair. And through reason, we can understand why these things feel so unjust. We come to understand that humans, as conscious agents, deserve to be treated in a way which respects our innate dignity. We find ourselves pulled towards justice by our empathy, our sense of self, and our desire to live in a world which is morally fair. Tonight, we will be defending secular justice. This means a framework which does not appeal to God or Scripture, based on natural rather than supernatural considerations. Humans naturally consider our duties, what sort of person we want to be, and the consequences of our actions. These considerations provide meaningful guidance on how we should act and how to construct a just society. What do our reflections tell us? They tell us that justice is explicable. It's not arbitrary. Justice must be nuanced. It's not disproportionate. Justice must be active. It's not complicit in the face of evil. My first argument is that the Christian account of where justice comes from cannot stand on its own. It's necessarily incomplete. In my second argument, I will show that non-arbitrariness, proportionality, and human dignity are incompatible with the stories of the Bible. Let's talk about the Christian origin of justice. Divine command theory asserts that justice comes from God's character definitionally, and that any framework lacking this is subjective. If we believe this, we are forced to believe that reason and empathy cannot guide us to what justice really is. But if we reject reason and empathy, Christianity itself can no longer differentiate itself from other faiths that will also call their God the definitional origin of justice. Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, even Greek mythology, these all maintain some form of divine command theory. Rather than going in circles asserting that one God is good while the other God is evil, what we do is we deploy empathy and reason as reliable guides towards what justice actually is. We look into the acts of God and see if we actually have any reasons to believe he is just. If God really is just, it's not because he tells you he's just. It's because he lives up to some external standard. Where does the standard come from? We contend that justice arises from a consideration of our duties between subjects with desires, with fears, with consciousness, and with agency. When we feel wronged by the acts of another, we implicitly recognize it would be unjust for us to do these same things to other people. That's reciprocity. It's not something which is philosophically complex, and it does not require the imposition of an all-knowing God. All it requires is human empathy and its extension through reason. Now, I'm not trying to claim that we're going to act justly at all times perfectly, that we're going to know exactly what justice is. Many atrocities have been done in the name of secularism. Our response to these atrocities is the strength secularism has over Christianity. Where secularism is intrinsically motivated to look into its past critically, employing reason and empathy to learn from our mistakes rather than defending them, Christianity is committed to defending all acts done by the biblical God, however unconscionable. If justice is the enemy of arbitrary cruelty, disproportionate punishment, and complicity to evil, then justice is the enemy of God. Murder cannot be justified on the basis of ethnicity. It is immoral to punish someone for something which is out of their control. Apparently, God disagrees. Samuel 15:3 commands the Israelites, "Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep." Christians will justify this on the basis that the Amalekites participated in child sacrifice and other depravities. This defense would be understandable had God not made an explicit point of killing the innocents, killing the children, killing the infants, killing the animals. Such punishment is arbitrary and inexplicable. The Bible is clear. God condones slavery. Genesis 24:25 tells us that slaves are a blessing from God, a sign of his grace and generosity. Exodus 21:20-21 tells us that slaves can be beaten as they are the owner's property. Modern Christians will argue that slavery was an unavoidable custom of the time, that it would be too hard or too disruptive to abolish it. These Christians misunderstand justice. Justice does not exist to protect the strong from the weak. It exists to protect the human dignity of those most vulnerable to exploitation. It exists to protect the people who needed someone to say, "I will not stand by while humans are bought and owned." The people who needed someone to say, "I do not care if I have to break every chain myself, for my heart will shatter if there was just one more life I could have saved." The Christian God did not say any of these things. Finally, Christianity presents divine judgment as the ultimate hope for retributive justice. Where under secularism, bad people might get away with doing bad things, under Christianity, it is guaranteed that the wicked will be punished in eternal fire and sulfur. They will be tortured not for 1 year, not for 10 years, not for 1,000,000 years, but for all of eternity. This is not justice done. This is a vindictive fantasy of an impetulant God incapable of taking rejection. Justice done requires nuance and it requires proportionality. It requires a punishment fitting the transgression, and this simply cannot be the case where eternal suffering is God's one-size-fits-all answer to rejection. For the Christians in the room today, picture someone, a family member, a friend, a loved one, someone you know to be a non-believer. Picture them and tell yourself that they deserve to suffer in eternal fire. Tell yourself that justice will not be done until they are screaming and begging for forgiveness that will never come. Hell is not the ultimate hope for justice. It is its greatest perversion. Genocide, slavery, torture. Secularism rejects that an entity responsible for these crimes could be the origin of justice. When secular people commit similar crimes, they act in a way which is abhorrent and despicable, and we do not try to make excuses for bullies and egotists, and we certainly do not try to incorporate their deeds into our own theory of justice. Guided by reason and empathy and grounded in our recognition of people's desires, pains, and autonomy, the secular framework is capable of reflecting on itself, embracing what is good, but more importantly, condemning what is evil. Christianity settles for a theory of justice which is arbitrary, disproportionate, and complicit to the grossest evils imaginable. Thank you.
Second MCU speaker, Bella.
Am I on? Cool. Thanks, Josh, for your speech. There was a lot to unpack there, and I'll try and do some of it in my talk, and I'm sure we'll do a lot of it in cross-examination. If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable for you to devour your friend. If you were a lion, it would be normal for you to have dozens of mates in your lifetime. And if you were a panda with twins, it would be likely that you would abandon one to take care of the other. But if humans do any of these things, we call them wrong, unfair, unjust. Why? Our argument tonight is that secularism does not provide a compelling answer to this question of justice, but Christianity does. I'd first like to rebut some of our opposition's claims. They have said that justice is objective and fixed, that it's based on our empathy and our reason that we have as humans. This is all well and good, but it does beg the question, how can we derive justice and the standards of justice that we hold today from our empathy and reason alone, when we can see, when we look to nature, that that is not something we can take for granted. This appeal to natural justice is misaligned with what we see in the world. Humans do terrible things. Our desire, our deepest desires are not what we would call aligned with justice. Justice is pulling ourselves out of what we want in our selfishness and our violence towards others for selfish gain and holding ourselves to a higher standard. Why do we do that? Why would we do that without some external standard to ourselves? You cannot derive the standards of justice that we have from inside ourselves alone. And this shaky foundation of no objective basis for morality allows anything to be permissible and anything to be justified, because it provides no way to prioritize different values or to refute an opposing view. We'll be discussing this more in the rebuttal section and addressing some of the other things that Josh mentioned, but have a think about this. Under secularism's view of justice, what makes one person's view of justice better than another person's view of justice? So Christianity claims that an all-good, all-knowing, and all-powerful God created the universe, and he made humans in his own image. Genesis 1 says, God created mankind in his own image. And this belief is often referred to as Imago Dei. the image of God. It means that all humans are created equal and they have dignity that is upheld through this status of being made in God's image. Not race, ethnicity, age, ability, social class, or utility define our worth as humans. Secularism provides no basis for claiming that humans have dignity. What can they appeal to? Rationality, empathy, consciousness, utility in society, all of these are in some way flawed. But the image of God provides a reason to uphold justice and human rights. Atheist historian Tom Holland speaks about how radically countercultural the early Christian church was in starting the first hospitals, aged care, fighting racism and slavery, enacting charity for the poor, starting universities, fighting for women's rights. Even the atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and radical modern-day atheist John Gray concede that if it wasn't for Christianity, human rights never would have arisen. Now, these people don't believe in God or Christianity, yet they recognize how central and compelling the Christian understanding of justice has been in the world. And this Christian belief of human dignity is now the foundation of our Western justice system today. The standards of justice that every single one of us take for granted. That was not always the case in the world. And this is my first point about what the practical implications of the Christian view of justice are in our world and for our lives. My second point is that Christianity uniquely enables the capacity for forgiveness. And let me tell you a story to illustrate this point. Corrie ten Boom was a Christian woman captured in World War II for hiding Jews from the Nazis. And she endured the horrors of concentration camps, watching her father and her sister Betsy die at the hands of the Nazis. Years later, as a survivor, she was at church one Sunday telling her story from the stage about how her Christian faith had given her strength and helped her stand up for justice. And after her talk, a man came up to her that she recognized as a Nazi soldier from their concentration camp. It all came flooding back to her, the mocking men and how they treated her sister Betsy. And he came up to her saying, "How grateful I am for your message, Frau Lin, to think that as you say, Jesus has washed away my sins." And he put out his hand to shake Corrie's. What would you do? Could you shake that Nazi's hand? Is there any world view or system of justice that says this man deserves to be forgiven for what he has done? Corrie struggled to raise her hand. Of course. Who wouldn't? But Corrie prayed. Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give me your forgiveness. And she says this. As I took his hand, the most incredible thing happened. From my shoulder, along my arm, and through my hand, a current seemed to pass from me to him, while into my heart sprang a love for this stranger that almost overwhelmed me. And so I discovered that it is not on our own forgiveness any more than on our own goodness that the world's healing hinges, but on his. And when he tells us to love our enemies, he gives, along with the command, the love itself. What an incredible story. And this is the freedom that Christianity gives us, not to fight violence with violence, not to take revenge or to hold that grudge that eats us from the inside, but because God has forgiven us, we have the freedom to forgive others. Romans 12 says, "Do not repay evil with evil, but overcome evil with good." And my third and final point, actually before that, secularism offers no reason to forgive those who've hurt you, but instead it allows for the view that it is right to take revenge and to meet violence with violence. My third point is that the Christian capacity for forgiveness relies on God's final justice. Forgiveness is only possible if we have hope that justice will be done one day. Otherwise, we end up living in hopelessness that the justice system is flawed and some people will never be held accountable. Christianity promises that justice will be done in Jesus Christ. And this hope that Christianity offers, out of this hope comes the capacity to forgive others. But that hope is only possible if we know that God will judge the oppressors and avenge the oppressed. And what is this Christian hope rooted in? Well, it's rooted in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And as Jesus took on the sins of the world through his death on the cross, he also rose from the dead. The tomb was empty. And this means two things. Jesus has defeated death, and therefore he offers the way for eternal life for everyone who believes in him. The second thing is that Jesus sits on the throne to come back for final judgment. Christianity believes all humans are made in God's image. Christianity enables the capacity for forgiveness. And Christianity offers a hope of ultimate justice. Secularism offers none of these things. And it may make claims of human dignity, equality, forgiveness, and hope. This really wants me to get off the stage. It may make these claims, but it cannot root these claims in any solid foundation. And that's something that we'll unpack more in cross-examination. Thank you.
Thank Bella for her speech. And now welcome up Andrew from MPS.
Testing? All good? Fantastic. Thank you. Christianity might have been an improvement 2,000 years ago. It is now 2,000 years hence, and philosophy has moved on from what the conditions were back then. I'm going to be arguing that the need to reconcile the biblical God to a God who is claimed to be all good forces you to accept definitions of good, justice, and love that are unacceptable. To do this, I'm going to make three arguments. Firstly, that the systems of justice we build in our society must be built on a secular basis. Secondly, that the Christian tradition does not reveal divine origin, but instead is very human in its capacity for misinterpretation, but lacks the human capacity for improvement that secularism brings. Thirdly, I'm going to argue that Christian justice has an incoherent understanding of mercy and redemption, which dovetails nicely with the material we've heard from the Christian Union. Before I get to that, I want to take a moment to respond to the idea that secularism has no basis for human dignity. And I want to reiterate what Josh has actually already told you on this. Firstly, I feel like I have a certain worthiness within myself and I'm deserving of moral consideration. And I presume because other people also are similar to me, that they feel the same about themselves. And when I see another person hurt, I feel an echo of that hurt, and that is called empathy. So I feel that others are also experiencing the feeling of wrongness when they feel their own inherent sense of their worthiness is taken from them. Secondly, I want to be able to say about myself that I am able to understand others, which gives me an additional push to reach out to others and to understand them. Thirdly, if I want to be treated well in the world, I treat others well, and they will treat me well in return, the reciprocity that Josh told you about. Fourthly, by establishing norms and systems based on mutual empathy and reciprocity, I will get to live in a just world, one where we all treat each other with dignity, the sort of world I want to live in. If instead you put your faith in the eternal justice of God, you actually have less incentive to build justice here. That's the problem. I am not a praying mantis. I am human, and I have human considerations like rationality and empathy, and that's why I don't kill my friends. So, my first argument, it works. Systems of justice in a multicultural society must be built on a secular basis. Number one, if you are deciding that an action is just, and your basis is, well,
well, justice comes from God, how do you resolve a dispute with someone who has a differing interpretation of justice, and their argument is, well, justice comes from their God? How do you build a system of justice in which people of many faiths must live together? In secularism, people of differing personal faiths can come together and they can build a criminal justice system or social justice systems by putting aside faith-based arguments and instead using secular reason and empathy so that they have a common language with which they can resolve their disputes about what justice is. Secondly, when someone is imprisoned without a justification that is grounded in reason and empathy, how do we expect them to understand the wrongness of their actions or commit to rehabilitation? If we are unable to explain why they are wrong, and instead we say, well, it was in some way against the justice of God or the will of God, a God that they might not even believe exists, then the justice system cannot be a useful tool of rehabilitation. So that system has to be built secularly. And if a Christian justice system were applied on a mass scale to people of all differing faiths, those people would become alienated from that justice system across ethnic and religious lines, which is a recipe for social disaster and strife if I've ever heard one. Finally, if we are to punish crimes because they are crimes against God, that can be used to justify wildly disproportionate punishments for non-existent crimes. I am gay. In the Bible, I am called an abomination. I am told I should be executed, and if I were born in a more Christian era, I would be executed. These days, I'm just told I'm a perversion of God's love. And I'm told this by people claiming to be Christians who then say they love me. Is this what love sounds like to you? Is this what justice sounds like to you? Was it justice when those passages were written, but somehow it isn't justice now? Was this a millennia of misunderstanding or misreading of those passages? If you believe that the God who said those things about me is just, I think I'm owed an explanation of that. My second argument is that the justice of the biblical God can be interpreted in multiple differing ways where each has a more or less equal claim to be a legitimate interpretation of God. The Christian Union, I presume, believes the stories of atrocity we've told you about should be read in the context of other passages like love thy neighbor. But another Christian might argue that love thy neighbor should be read in the context of those atrocities, and you cannot differentiate them without employing the secular tools that we've talked about. Throughout history, Christians have argued that murder and torture in the service of conversion is an act of love, because you should save those you love from hell. It's a notion of love, twisted into something horrifying. And this capacity for misinterpretation has led to people using faith to justify all manner of historical crimes. The Christian Union might argue that these things were perversions of a true Christian message, and we're not going to ask them to justify the Crusades. But we will say that faith as a guide to justice fails so often and so atrociously that it is absurd to believe that it is uniquely divine in its authorship. Instead, it is just as human as secularism, and just like with secularism, to see if it's working or not, you must use the secular tools we've talked to you about. Christian justice has the human capacity for error, but when bound to the Christian tradition and a biblical God, lacks the human capacity for improvement. When it is improved, it is always by secular tools. My final argument is that the Christian afterlife makes proportionate justice and the possibility of redemption absurd. In the Christian belief, everyone, even the Nazis, no matter how awful, are capable of redemption, so long as they make sincere repentance before death. After death, apparently it doesn't count. Okay, think about this. You repent the minute before you die, eternal reward. The minute after you die, eternal punishment. If life continues on another plane, why is this particular 70-odd years the only one where that decision would matter? The common explanation is that once dead, you would have a proof of Christianity. Okay, really think about this. In order to avoid a state of permanent hellfire and torture, you are asked to read the stories that Josh told you about and conclude that the entity who gave you those verbatim orders that he read out is all good. You have to conclude that, or you will be tortured forever. Christian hell is not a test of justice. Their final test isn't justice at all. Whether you're moral doesn't seem to matter. It's just a test of your ability to have faith in spite of all the evidence that this entity is good. that genocide might just be relative to those times, or that maybe in those days sexual slavery was okay, or that sometimes your daughter might be property to be sold. We think the moral response to these passages is not subservience, it's not awe, it's outrage and indignation. If you ingest the stories of the Bible, if you let them warp you and twist you into believing that this is what love is, that this is what good is, that this is what justice is, think about what you could do to one another. Think about what you become. Thank you.
Thank you, debaters, for your opening thoughts. Very much appreciated. I already have some questions. I wonder if you guys have some questions. If you do, remember, note them down. There will be opportunity for you guys to ask them a bit later.
Yeah. And so for now, we're going to have a quick break. So we'll be 10 minutes for you to stretch your legs, go to the toilet, write down those questions, talk to your neighbor, etc., etc. So feel free to go and do all those things, and we will be back at 7:17 for cross-examination.
All right, guys, we might get started with our next section. Hope you've had time to stretch your legs and hope you've had time to have a few conversations. There will be much more time coming up to finish these conversations. And we appreciate your promptness. And we know there's a lot of people in here. And we appreciate you guys being prompt. Thank you. Just a quick one. Really appreciate the positive crowd behaviour. Well done. That's a big tick for you guys. And we're now going to head into a time of cross-examination. So this will be a time where the debaters go back and forth a bit. You're still an audience member, so you are not invited to go back and forth. But please, like we keep reiterating, please, we do value your questions. Write them down. Hopefully we can ask them Q&A, or we can talk about them afterwards. Let me pass over to Salome.
Great. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, cross-examination follows the format of 5-minute blocks. So you have approximately 30 seconds to ask a question, then there's about a 3-minute response time, and then a 2-minute sort of right of reply. I'm not going to be timing this in an as strict manner for the sake of good discussion, but I will rein debaters in at the point where it's tangential or I think it's unfair and teams are kind of hogging the floor, which I hope doesn't happen. But we'll still wrap up at kind of a half an hour mark. Without further ado, though, I'd like to invite MCU to ask our first question.
Thanks, Salome. Our first question is, so you guys have talked a lot about reason and empathy as a sole basis for human dignity and for human justice. And you've argued that that is a superior basis than the one that Christianity offers of being made in God's image. But we would like to ask you, if every human has reason and empathy and is able to get to justice from this, why does injustice even exist in the world, and how do you explain that?
Well, those aren't the only things we have, obviously. There are other competing interests, other competing instincts, other competing parts of our personality, which is why it's so important that we take the time and the energy that's necessary to build systems of justice within our society and norms about treating one another fairly and justly, and in a way that is explainable to people across cultures, so that we live in a world where people act justly and we live under systems of governance where justice is made real. And obviously, over time, this has been made more and more true. So I would much rather be living in the systems of secular justice that we tend to have in the West right now than under the Middle Ages or like the time of Christ or anything like that. There is progress that's being made. It's often slow and it's often difficult progress, but it's important progress. And it's progress that's often motivated by people thinking that we have to do this here, we have to do this now if we want to bring about a world where what we feel inside, our empathy, our sense of worthiness, our sense of justice, is to become a reality in this world. And what I'm concerned with is that if we trust only that there will be an end of days kind of accountability and that all accountability can be managed in that way, then we're unlikely to have good systems of justice because people won't feel as motivated. But I mean, you can also just reverse this question, right? Because why is there so much evil and wrong in the world if justice is created by God? I mean, I presume that Stalin was made in the image of God too. And to me, that seems a little weird. It seems a little weird to believe that Stalin was made in the image of something that is all good and all just, but rather something that is deeply flawed and needs our effort to find correction for it. We've got like 40 seconds. Have you got anything? No. Nope. All right.
Yeah, awesome. There was a question in there. Can we now respond to that? Is that how that works? Yeah? Okay, cool. So you made a good point. And the example of Stalin is a tangible one. So let's use that. The Christian doctrine says that every human is made in the image of God, and that includes people who have done terrible things. And Christianity also provides a explanation for why humans do terrible things, which is something that I feel like is lacking from the secular point of view. So the Christian belief that all humans are made in the image of God and chose to disobey and reject God that belief is what we call sin, and that's what this injustice and sadness and hurt and pain in the world comes from. That's the tangible answer that Christianity provides. We chose to disobey God and cut ourselves off from the source of all life, goodness, love, and the consequences of that are that our world is broken. We are broken. Everybody has those competing desires, as you have spoken to, Andrew, of empathy, reason, but also selfishness and everything that flows from that, that means that we don't follow our reason and empathy. Christianity gives a tangible reason for why that is the case, and it also gives a tangible response for how we should then live, knowing that the line between good and evil cuts through the middle of every human heart. What brings us out of that? What draws us out of that? Christianity provides a response, and from our perspective and what we've heard so far, secularism does not provide a response. And so I guess a question coming off of that would be that what helps humans under the secularist point of view distinguish, prioritize, differentiate between the natural instincts that are good that we should follow and the natural instincts that are bad that we should not follow?
Never mind, we're projecting my voice today. I'm going to leave that question up to your imagination. It's MPS's turn to ask now.
If God's character is perfectly just, we can expect to see his justice in all of his acts. What justice can we find in the Amalekite genocide and biblical slavery?
Yeah, big questions. These are questions that have been going on for hundreds, thousands of years, right? And so, how do we reconcile this unjust world with a seemingly just God? And it's, a very difficult question. And we have a lot of Bible. It's a pretty thick book to sort of uncover here. It's I know, sorry. And I think in one instance, this is a little bit of, I think, a false question. I think the question that we perhaps should be asking is that we see so much injustice in the world, and I think that's very clear. But do we see a God that seems to want to reach out of that injustice? And I think we see that in Jesus Christ when God himself came down on the cross. I think we can break down some of the broader things and then specifics. So just in case there's people who don't know, we sort of have this Old Testament and then the New Testament. So the Old Testament is sort of the pre-Jesus stuff. So it's like a historical account, but it's also here are some laws dictating X, Y, Z. And now Jesus himself says that this law was given because you guys have such hardened hearts, because you guys don't actually really know what's good or not. And so this isn't the ideal that Jesus and God has for us, but this is what was given the context of this. Everyone was trying to conquest each other, right? And so, yeah, it's a difficult case. But in the New Testament, that's been fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus says, I'm come to fulfill the law. So everything in the Old Testament is kind of fulfilled. It's essentially abolished, except for some sort of moral laws. And the moral laws are fulfilled in the principle, the sole principle. You've claimed divine command. The only one divine command that we really have is fulfilled in this, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think our friends have claimed that this empathy is sort of something that we inherently know. And the Christian view says, actually, yeah, we kind of have this imbued divine law written in our hearts, as Romans says, but how consistently we deny this empathy. And I think our learned friends have suggested that empathy is something exclusive to secularism. However, I think this is clearly not the case. Sorry, I'll address the actual stuff that we're talking about. So, yeah, it's difficult to I think it's difficult in one sense to kind of make a claim of moral superiority over God. I think even if we take away his justness and we call that into question, you still have to deal with omniscience. And I think our friends have kind of done this logical line of reasoning where if God exists, God is unjust, therefore God does not exist. And I think there's a little bit of logical incongruency here, but I think we'll move past that for the sake of the debate. And yeah, so I think even if you make that claim, you still have to have a claim in and of yourself, a moral claim. And so what that claim is saying that claim is above God, who is all-knowing. I think there's some difficulty there, but anyway, so yeah. So the slavery thing. So you brought up
I'm not sure the exact verse, but the verse that you have was of servitude, and the word there was written with servitude. And I think this is particularly interesting because yeah, the so-called slavery, we only have this one word slavery in English, which is sort of a misnomer. We often think of like 19th, 18th century slavery, but it wasn't like that. This slavery was actually consensual. So if you were in debt, right? So this is the verse that it's talking about. If you're in debt, if you're in so much debt, there wasn't any welfare back then, right? And so what you would do is this state of indebted servitude. So you would say, I will give myself to you, and you pay me, and I will pay off my debt to you. Now, if after 7 years that debt wasn't paid, you had to set the slave free. So of one thing. So this servitude was largely consensual and a way for people to get out of debt. It's not really slavery in that sort of sense. In sort of the genocide, yeah, it's a very difficult claim. And so, yes, you've correctly identified that the Amalekites sort of worship this idea of child sacrifice and this idea of bestiality and incense. They incessantly did it. And so there's kind of like two sort of reasons as to why that is the case. There's kind of the satisfaction of judgment. So God judged the Amalekites for their wrongdoing. And then we also have sort of the necessity of that for the continuation of God's plan. And so the first one is kind of a little bit more simpler, which is that for 800 years, yeah, this nation had continued to thrive and worship child sacrificing, incense, idolatry, and God made a sovereign claim to enact judgment. So on the second one, which is kind of a little bit more relevant, which is that God had ordained Israel to bring about Jesus. And so God's primary goal is to live in perfect creation, live in perfect unity with his creation. The only way that could be fulfilled was Jesus. And so the Old Testament continuously points towards Jesus and uses Israel as a means to bring about that, to bring about Jesus. So Israel has this sort of special place in the Old Testament, that this coming forth of Jesus. And so the difficulty is that, well, okay, Israel's in this place where everyone's trying to conquer each other, and Israel also has to try to uphold these moral laws. How do we sort of protect them? And so the Amalekites, for 400 years prior, continuously, incessantly tried to essentially, kill all of Israel. And they also tried to spiritually conquer them. They corrupted their ideals with these child sacrifice ideals, these sort of different, these incest and bestiality. And so Israel had to be preserved from that. And so the difficulty comes, of course, is like, well, what about the innocents? And yeah, this is a difficult claim. And so I think when we look to the Old Testament, actually God gives us a glimpse of hope. We see that, Abraham, when there's the destruction of Sodom, which is a very similar narrative, Abraham himself, he's like, how is this just, God? How can you say this? What if there is just, 100 righteous people, 50 righteous people, 10 righteous people? And God's like, trust me, lean on me, trust me, I've got this, I am the God, I will repay. And then the next story that we have is the story of Lot, a righteous man who lived in Sodom, where angels came down to Sodom and they took him out because he was deemed righteous in the Lord's name. We don't know how many Lots there were at Sodom. Likewise with Rahab and the Canaanites, we don't know how many there were. We don't know how many there were with the Amalekites. There's also this idea of the children, and this is a very difficult claim, and I think we can be very sympathetic to this claim, and God is sympathetic to this claim. So many books of the Old Testament have us outcrying to God, how is this just? And so I think the problem is that the Amalekites...
Might get MCU to wrap up, so final few
Can I make one?
sentences.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, and this is very difficult. And so the thing is that the Amalekites continued to thrive after this, and so the way that they would recover essentially from a military loss is they would kill all the children. They would sacrifice all the children to Baal, who's a satanic sort of figure. And so it's very difficult to do this and then to leave all these kids around because they would essentially be put as child sacrifice. And I think there's it's difficult because we're judging God, and we as Christians are very hesitant to do this because we don't think we have a moral claim to do so. But yeah, nonetheless, this was kind of a mercy in a sense, I would say, but I can't say that indefinitely. And it's a very difficult claim to make. I think we're very sympathetic when these things happen. But I think we look towards the cross and the grace that the New Testament provides. And we see this is clearly a God who is not indifferent to injustice, who sent his only holy and begotten son to his most accursed death for our sake.
If you are an all-powerful, all-good God, it seems incredulous to me to believe that the only way to perform a military campaign is by the mass killing of infants. It is also unclear to me if your claim is that the killing of infants is justified because the adults might sacrifice them. After you've defeated them and killed all the adults, who exactly is sacrificing those infants? Why could God not have told the Israelites, adopt these children as your own? These are innocents who did nothing wrong, and so they should be taken care of. God did not. What moral lesson are we to determine from that? But the real distinction here, and the real problem that the Christian Union has in this debate, is that they are defending two mutually exclusive versions of God. A God that they claim is all good and all just, which falls afoul of the problem of not being able to distinguish itself from the gods of other religions, and the exclusively Christian bit, which is a God that is revealed through the stories of the Bible. And you cannot maintain both of them. The stories of the Bible reveals things that are simply unjust, unless, of course, you warp yourself into believing actually sometimes it's okay to believe that infants should be sacrificed or killed if it's for a military campaign. I actually think that there should be rules around the sort of warfare that we can conduct in order to make it less awful. So that tension there is something that seems to me means that you cannot derive a consistent theory of justice. And if it is true that God cannot be contradictory, as Will said in his speech, then this God cannot exist because the God as described is contradictory. You have like 10 seconds, lol.
Yeah. I think there's also a lot to be unpacked from the structure of answering that question. I think very clearly everything said was to water down the wrongness of slavery and genocide, because clearly there is no justice to be found in those actions. It's only the capacity to try to say it's not as bad as it looks. I think in that way, it does not reveal justice, and a divine God who is perfectly just should be just in all those acts, not just not unjust. Some of these watering downs don't work. The idea that slavery was consensual, I think, is one of those. We have explicit verse where it's talked about selling daughters into slavery and the taking of slaves from captured tribes. We also have the idea of letting a slave go after 6 years. This is a very specific claim in the Bible. It's only Hebrew slaves that they let go. Slaves taken from other areas, slaves taken not from the Hebrew people, they were free to be held indefinitely. There's no verse on letting them go after 7 years. Yeah, that's what I had to say about that.
MCU, if you would like to ask a question.
Our next question for you guys is sort of tapping into what we started discussing previously, and we just want to push into that a little bit. So maybe I'll just ask that same question again. What if humans have all of these different competing desires and competing natural tendencies, and if our evolution and our nature is the only way to explain why those exist, then what avenue does secularism have to be able to prioritize or differentiate between or make any moral judgment on what human tendencies are good and which ones are bad? And from that, which is a question that I asked in my opening statement, how can, under the secular framework, can you make a moral judgment on anyone else's system of justice that might be different to yours if they're making the same appeals to natural tendencies and natural desires?
So on this question of differentiation, we gave you a few principles that I think are uncontroversial. So the idea of explicability rather than arbitrariness. I think you've fundamentally misunderstood justice if you're trying to tell me that justice should be arbitrary. I think we're talking about different things if you're trying to tell me that justice is arbitrary. Same for proportionality. It's kind of in the word, right? Disproportionate, kind of bad, not in proportion, right? I don't think anyone could say that that could possibly be a part of justice. And same for activity versus complicity. Justice, I think the idea that justice is something that you just sit by and you watch what occurs and you form some idea in your mind. I think anyone who tells you that also has clearly misunderstood justice. So I think on those three grounds, we have a very strong basis for justice where our disagreements, if two systems of justice are both proportionate, they're both explicable, and they're both active rather than inactive, I think I'd rather be disagreeing on the minutiae of that, right? I'd rather be disagreeing on the small parts of that, if we can agree on those three principles. I think the problem with secular justice with Christian justice as put forward is that it has to contend with the problematic examples that I put forward before, that our debates are not, does this person deserve 1 year or 2 years for stealing an apple? It's, is genocide ever acceptable? Is slavery ever acceptable? And I think the fact that we're still stuck in those questions, I think it's a much better state of secular justice if we are already at the principles that we've put forward, which are uncontroversial in my opinion. I think I'd much rather be in that state than before. In terms of prioritizing human tendencies, we've got a few metrics for doing this, right? We've got a societal metric. Obviously, society from above benefits best when we are pro-social, right? When we act with empathy, when we act with compassion to one another. So from a top-down approach, we've got a lot of incentives to choose those sorts of tendencies over in others. From the internal conception, I think, you can discuss and debate this, but I think a lot of the happiest people in the world, a lot of the people who are most thriving, a lot of the people who are flourishing the most are the people who act well to one another. So I think we've got a very strong internal reason to be good to others. Andrew?
So I think there are a couple of ways that we can distinguish good instincts from bad instincts. The first is just to ask the sort of moral imperative question is, should we construct a world that is built upon this particular instinct? And if that instinct is we should all steal from one another, then I think we all instinctively would realize that that would be a world that we don't want to live in. We would want to live in a world where people were all kind and compassionate and had empathy for one another. And that distinguishes a good instinct from a bad instinct. And it's rooted in the feeling of reciprocity that we all have for one another. We want to be treated in a certain way. Therefore, we assume others want to be treated in that way. I don't want to be stolen from or lied to or murdered. Therefore, I think it would probably be different if I were to do those things to others than if I were to do things that I do want other people to treat me with, kindness and empathy and so on. And so those ways, as we pointed out in our speeches actually, are ways that we can distinguish our good instincts from our bad instincts.
So, yes.
Do we
have a right of
respond?
reply. I would put to you to be slightly quick as we're going over, but
Cool.
yes.
Yeah, so we agree with a lot of what you said actually. And so these ideas of empathy and reason and being able to be explained to people in arbitrary and these are all Christian claims. They're actually derived from Christianity. And so I think we're appealing to instincts that we have as a country. Our legal system that's largely derived from Christian principles, such as the rule of law, that people are all held equally accountable under the law. And I think if you look at places that don't have these sort of instincts that we appeal to under the Judeo-Christian values, that's not the case. It's clearly not the case. And I think that this line of reasoning is exactly what we saw and we continue to sort of see, 150 years ago, is where these societies say, yes, we can reason for ourselves. Yes, we can empathize for ourselves. And that's where you get Mao's Russia and you kill 100 million Chinese, or in Stalinist Russia, 35 million, or in Pao Tsang's Cambodia. It's when people, or even in Nazi Germany, this whole idea of eugenics, they all thought that they were the best people. They all thought they reasoned the best, they empathized the best. But ultimately, when we lean on our own understanding of this, they fall short. Only Christianity exclusively gives us an imperative to uphold human dignity, because we are made in the divine image. Jesus says, for what you have done for the least of my brothers, you've done for me. Love thy neighbor by yourself. This is the divine imperative. And it seems that our learned friends have utilized this divine imperative and claimed it as their own. It is not their own. Modern universities were created by Christians because we valued reason. this is the humanist point. Like More, Petrarch, Erasmus, all of these people, they all appealed to these empathies, these communal values which you claim, but these are Christian values. We don't find that these exist. I think to the same extent when we actually look at injustice in the world, I think it's very uncompelling to actually to see injustice in the world and to say, tell your assailant, tell your persecutor to be more empathetic, tell them to be more reasonable, tell them to have this proportionality. I don't think they'll listen. I don't think anyone listens. I think people desire for money, greed. Like I don't think this argument actually stands when we actually look at the injustices in our world. Like this doesn't stand, I'm afraid. I think it's a radically unempathetic claim because people don't. Sorry.
I might get you to wrap up, but thank you. MPS.
Our next question is on hell. What is it? What is it like? Who goes there? And how could it be proportionate to the crimes of those who go there?
Yep, that's a good question. And it was something that was brought up a couple of times in your case. So we did hope to get the chance to be able to talk about it. I might have to clarify on a couple of those things because there are a couple of questions you asked, but I'll start with what is it, which I think was your first question. So hell is a concept that's defined in Christianity as the complete separation from God. And the Bible says that that's bad. Now, there might be a question there that asks, is it really that bad? Like, if you're not a Christian now, I don't follow God now, I'm not with God now, and I seem to be living a pretty good life. Like, why is that a bad thing? But the way that the Bible describes hell is on that day of final judgment, which we mentioned in our cases, which is necessary for there to be ultimate justice. Like, if we wished that there was no final judgment, then the state of the world as it is would go on and on forever and nothing would ever be definitively made right. So final justice is necessary for us to have hope and for us to be able to forgive each other. And so this final day of justice, some will be saved through Jesus Christ, through believing in him and spending eternity with God, and some will spend eternity separated from God. And because Christianity claims that we were made by God in his image to be in relationship with him, then being completely cut off from God and the sustainer and giver of all life means that it's like the analogy of a fish out of water. A fish was made to live in water, and when it lies there on the ground out of water and writhes around, it can't breathe, its body does not work properly, it's torture, because that was not the way the fish was made to live. And that is how the Bible describes hell. So I hope that clarifies what hell is, because I think sometimes that's a little bit of a misunderstood concept. But logically, the separation from God means torture for the human soul, and that is how the Bible describes it, and that is what the concept of hell is described as in the Bible. The next one was who goes there, is that right? Yeah, so I think I explained that a little bit in the first part of my answer. When Jesus came, died on the cross and rose again, he offers us that same thing, to rise again to eternal life, to be with God. And despite our imperfection, he takes on our sin. So we take on his perfection in the eyes of God. And so the Bible says if you confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is Lord, you will be saved. And you will spend eternity in life with God, where everything is restored. No more tears, crying, pain. That's what the Bible says. Everything will be made new. And those who choose not to believe in God will not spend eternity with him. And that's a decision that God gives us the grace to make in this time here on earth, while the world is not perfect. But there's a question that often comes up: why doesn't God just bring judgment now, make everything right? He could, yeah, he's all powerful. And the Bible says that the reason why he chooses not to do that is because he is gracious in giving us this time to bring others to know him, to bring others to life, so that when judgment comes, I pray that all of us will be there. And so that's a choice that each of us has to make, and nobody except God knows which way you choose. So that answers the question about who goes there. I don't know if we have time for any more.
Yeah, I might pass to MPS for right of reply.
I think that on the basis of the evidence provided in the Bible, it is perfectly reasonable to have doubts. It is reasonable to say, I am unconvinced. And the idea that the proportionate and appropriate and just response to that is to go to a place that is described as torture, that is described in the Bible as fire, as wailing and gnashing of teeth. I think that that is a disproportionate response to that. And I think that the entity who says, ignore all the things that I've actually done, believe I'm all good, or I will torture you forever, is not worthy of our consideration as an origin of love or as an origin of justice, because they are in violation of those most fundamental tenets of justice. We both agree that our conscience is an important part of our system of ethics. My conscience tells me that an entity that would require that is a wicked entity. And I think that I should not go to hell forever. And a fish out of water is in pain and like it sounds bad, you know? It sounds bad. Okay, those are my thoughts.
I also think it's quite revealing again, where the focus is on what hell is like. I think, the Christian Union is stressed just the separation of God part, and they don't talk about the explicit suffering that is discussed in the Bible, that it's laid out as a place of fire and brimstone and gnashing of teeth. I think the reason why they focus on the separation of God is that there's an implicit sense that it would be unjust. Like, the suffering of hell is not something we look at and see justice in automatically. If it was, the Christian Union would be holding their chest out. They'd say, yes, and you'll be suffering, and you'll be in fire and brimstone, and you'll be gnashing your teeth, and it'll be a terrible place of the worst torture possible. If that really was where our convictions of empathy lied, they would have said it. And I think it's very revealing that they don't talk about that. They talk about the separation of God. They talk about a watered down version of hell. Yeah.
MCU, do you have a question?
Yes, we do have another question. Why was justice, as we now know it today, which you claim has come from secularism, why was that conception of justice not developed before Christianity? The world existed for a long time before that, and nobody ever came up with this system out of our natural desires and instincts. And why does it still not exist today in some parts of the world, all parts of the world, that are not built on Christian foundations?
So, as I said, even if you can persuade us that it's true that Christianity was an improvement of the justice of 2,000 years ago, and even if you can say that the process of Christianity was a necessary process to getting to where we are today, that doesn't mean that Christianity today is the best form of justice. We have in fact superseded that and replaced it with a much more mature forms of philosophy. And those things take time and they take effort. I'm sorry it wasn't instant, but Christian justice has hardly been instant either. And if you look through the history of Christianity and how it has implemented justice throughout its time in control of Europe, I don't see justice there. I see witch trials. I see the arbitrary killing of people who are not part of Christianity. I see wars against what they saw as infidels. This does not seem to me to be the end point of justice. It might have been a stepping stone, and thanks, but we can move on from that. We can grow up. And as God says somewhere in the Bible, we put away childish things when we grow up.
Yeah. On secularism, we're not trying to say that every idea of justice in the Bible is bad, right? Like, secularism isn't atheism. We're not trying to deny every single part of every single religion. What we're saying is that when we do look at these texts, we need to understand them through empathy and reason. We have to apply our critical thinking skills to these texts. We can't just accept them on face, right? When we look at some of the beauty in the Bible, I think there's a lot of beauty in the Bible. The grace, the forgiveness, all of that I think is incredibly beautiful. And should be part of a system of justice. But we know this through applying our reason and our empathy, and we get rid of the things that aren't part of that shouldn't be part of a system of justice, right? The terrible things that happen, I've talked about them, ad nauseum, so I won't bring them up again, but you know what I'm talking about. These sorts of things we reject. We reject them because we can apply our reason and our empathy to these constructs and say, I don't just trust that God is definitionally good. I don't just trust that everything written on this page is necessarily true, is necessarily just. I say to myself, if they are true, I'm going to find it out for myself. And I think that's a powerful tool of secularism.
I think what I'm hearing from your answers to these questions is an inconsistency in the choice of which parts of Christianity to endorse and to actually credit secularism with, when that's not the case, and which parts to reject. I think in our Christian framework we try to maintain intellectual integrity by being consistent with not picking and choosing different parts of what we choose to believe and what we don't, but rather doing the hard work of trying to reconcile all of these things into one worldview. And it's messy and it's complicated, and what we see in the world does not reflect the standard of justice that we both claim to uphold, and we are trying to explain why that is the case and how we should respond to it. And I think Christianity comes out on top every time in that argument. But I think there's a question to be answered there about how it is from Christianity and to credit them to secularism and then to say we've grown out of it and now we can leave it behind, when Christianity has built the Western world as we know it today. But something else that I think is coming up a little bit is that conscience and the way that our conscience and what we feel in our empathy and reason is indicative of morality, what is right and wrong. We agree with that. And we would say that the basis for that is because God has given us a conscience. We are made in his image. He is just, he is good. And that's how we know what justice and goodness are. Yes, that's been corrupted by our brokenness and by the state of the world. And so we don't always enact it perfectly. But nevertheless, we have that, and it's given to us by God. And because it's given to us by God, God is the starting point. Something I'm hearing from you guys a lot is that we are the starting point, and we then put our own system of morality onto judging what God's standard of morality is. And I think that that's a bit of a tension that I just wanted to raise that might keep coming up. But personally, I think it is more compelling to start from a broader, bigger, higher point of view than simply just yourself. And that's something maybe we can explore. And if you want to add on.
Like 2 sentences.
Can I have a lot of commas? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. So I think the problem with this worldview is that I think it's practically and philosophically incredibly idealistic. So what it's essentially saying is that we increasingly become ever more just and ever more rational, and that we can sort of bounce off these Christian ideals that were good and done, and now we can do it for ourselves. But I think the problem with this is that we can't. And so I think when we look at history, we see that when people actually, have jumped off to these ideals and then have said, we can do it for ourselves, that's how you get tyranny, dictatorship, people with the biggest stick deciding what justice is. And that ultimately means the death and oppression of thousands, millions of people. And the world does not become increasingly idealistic and rational. It wins and wanes to these different powers. Powers change. What's keeping it constant? God's divine command to love thy neighbor.
Alrighty. Final question.
So I've kind of got 2 questions here. Kind of. So my first one is, I'll give a bit of framing. Basically, for something that comes from God, our conscience seems to contradict God a lot. So what should we do? What should we do when our conscience, our empathy, and our reason screams against what the biblical God commands? I guess I can do one question. That's fine.
That's a really good question, and I think that's really interesting because it's true. Like there is actually certain parts of our like rationale and our stanzas of justice where we cry out to God and we say, "How can this be?" And there's whole books of the Bible where people cry out, like Habakkuk. This whole book is like, "How can you say this is just, God? Like I don't get it. I don't reason with it." And I think one of the things that we have to realize is that when we trust on God, we actually don't need to figure these things out for ourselves. Like we live with a just God, and when we trust on Him, He shows us what is right, and it's beyond. I think if we use our rationale, we can see that everything is fine-tuned in the world that points towards God. That in creation, in our eyes, in the laws of the universe, that if there were any more maths, like any more greater or bigger, it would collapse. These all point us towards God. Our consciousness, C.S. Lewis said, a man. My argument against God is that the world seems so cruel and unjust. But what basis was I using when I told the world it was cruel and unjust? A man does not know a line is broken unless he has some idea of a straight line. And so this kind of idea is that yes, we do, but God, like he says what is right, and he says that, look, the stuff in the Old Testament, this was because your hearts were hard. This had to occur so that I can live in perfect creation with you. This injustice has to endure so that we can live in perfect creation, so that Jesus can die on the cross. He loved us so much that he's grieved by this injustice that has to occur so that he can like die for us. Like this is what justice means. This is grace. Is that God like loves us so much he's grieved by this injustice. And he gets it, but it's like a part of his nature that he has to die for us. It's a part of his nature that he loves us so much that has to occur. And I think when we take our empathy and we do have this empathy and we say, okay, we have this objective reasoning. Why? And then that's where we see the divine law in our hearts. A divine lawgiver has to give us a divine law in our hearts. Can't come from evolution. I think that has dangerous implications that indeed could be extrapolated and indeed was extrapolated. But all these things, God has given us this creation, this fine-tuning to point towards Him and to say, this is where I am. We do use our rationale. We do use our empathy. They all point towards God.
I guess the problem I have with all of that, and the idea that God can be a kind of starting point when we have, how can that be possible when even within Christianity, there are wildly differing understandings of what and who God is and what is good to God? If that version of God does not actually give us a clear answer of what is good, because it contains all the passages that we talked about, how are we to navigate between the different passages and their different requirements? And what we've discussed is that it should be the tools of reason and empathy, where if we encounter things in our cultural history that seem to us to be bad, we should interrogate them using secular tools, and when they disagree, that secular tools should come out ahead. Because in your version of things, when people's desire to kill one another, when their desire to hold slaves, also can claim to be a part of their image of God and has a great deal of biblical commandments behind that, that seems to us to be very dangerous. You've told us that Christianity built the Western world, but it took them 2,000 years, right? And those were 2,000 years of extraordinary oppression, of murder, of warfare, of killing, and debates over what the Christian message is. And it just happens to be that when people started applying the tools of reason and empathy, that's when people moved beyond the Middle Ages and gave us something better. That's the strength of secularism, right? And so when you tell us that, oh, these great monsters of history like Hitler and the Holocaust did not happen out of nothing or out of secularism. It happened out of 2,000 years of blaming the Jewish people as a nation for the murder of Christ. It happened after 2,000 years of Christians organizing massacres and pogroms against the Jewish people of Europe. So if you're going to tell us that it is secularism that causes these kinds of things, then I think we need a better explanation of why those things were so common when Christianity was the sole arbiter of what was good and justice in Europe.
Excellent. We might finish up cross-examinations there. Thank you to all of the debaters.
Thank you, debaters, and thanks, Salome, and thank you guys for not jumping out of your seat. I appreciate it. Yes, we're now going to head into, we're going to move slowly into a time of Q&A, and Liam will help us to see what happens then.
Having thanked you for not jumping out of your seat, I now advise you to do so in an intellectual sense. There is a QR code on the board which you can see that will take you to a Slido where there will be a text box for you to answer your questions. Could you please start your question with the initial of whichever club's debaters you would like it to be asked? So that's MPS if you want it to go to these two gentlemen over here, and MCU if you want it to go over here. Or both, if you would like. Feel free to add your name to the end of your question if you would like to take credit for your excellent ideas. Now, of course, there are, I'm very glad to say, many people in this room. We will obviously not be able to answer all of your questions, but we will try and sift through them and capture the feeling of the room. We will have a short break now. We urge you, it is a short break. It is time for you to formulate your questions. So please be ready to come back and rejoin us at 8:16.
All right, if you can hear this, then encourage your friend who is talking to stop talking. Thanks, guys. Have a seat. Sit back. There will be time to finish your conversations, I promise. And we're just going to get a Q&A started. But before we're going to start our Q&A, I do have someone's keys here. You don't have to run up and grab them now. But if you need your keys, please come see me. Otherwise, I'll sell it. No, I'm joking. I won't sell it. All right, so sorry. Is it a Maserati key? I'm not going to tell you. I'll keep it.
Yep, so we're going to be I'm going to be slightly more strict on timing for the sake of getting through more questions. This is going to be less free-flowing than rebuttal time, but yes. So I'll hand back to Marnus.
We have the first question to MPS. And I'm reading these as you guys have submitted them. So, this is from Ezekiel. What's stopping you from saying that in 50 years we aren't unjust now? Let me restart. What's stopping you from saying that in 50 years we aren't unjust now? Are we right now settling for an imperfect mode of justice? If we accept that there is a natural progression of ethics, then where are you progressing to?
I mean, gosh, I do hope that we continue to improve. Like, things aren't perfect in the world, and I hope that as more and more people commit to secular ethics and to these systems that secular ethics built, like international justice norms and norms about behavior, that our world continues to become more and more just. Now, is there a state of perfect justice that I can imagine now? I don't know. Maybe some new philosopher will come out, and maybe you're sitting in this room that will be able to describe such a state for us. And if you do, I'm glad for it. I am glad if someone is able to rationally convince me that there is more and better forms of justice, because then I can live up to those as well, because I can adopt them. And I think that this great strength of secularism is that continuous capacity to self-improve, because it isn't tied into a biblical ethics or a biblical God that is so rooted in the past.
I think the other important thing is we're not trying to argue here for any complete account of secularism, right? We're not trying to argue for one philosophical theory or another. We're just giving a framework, and this framework is reason and empathy. And I think I'd be very upset if we ever started to build justice on anything but reason and empathy. I think those should be constants, even if we can improve our ideas of what specifically that might entail. The idea of reason and empathy, I think that should be consistent.
Awesome. We have a question for MCU.
Indeed we do. And it's not really a question, it's actually a statement. It simply says, you still have not justified the killing of innocents, considering they were not even capable of sin. Infants.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and of course, I think we're all very sympathetic to it. It seems to be like the only time that it seems that's actually occurred in the Old Testament, and I think, I think one of the reasons is because if they're infants who have committed no sin, then they essentially like go to heaven, and so I think this is more of a mercy than making them go to child sacrifice, which would be kind of the inevitable result. Because when the Amalekites, a lot of the Amalekites fled, they like came back, and so like their option would be to kill all of those children there, and that's kind of like their ritual of like, here's a loss, here's how we get better, is by making this appeal to sort of to Baal, and I think it when we use our it's injustice if man is doing that, but God kind of has this sovereignty because he knows like all possible things that can occur. And so I think it's speculative as humans to suggest that we know all of those possibilities and to say that, oh, we know better than God. Like, why couldn't he just do this? Well, because God does know that. And I think it's incredibly difficult to make that claim, just even philosophically. Yeah.
MPS, next question. Is it okay that ultimate justice is never achieved under your framework?
Well, first of all, I would rather that, like, there are some people for whom we do not create perfect justice, than that the version of justice that we apply onto all people is one that is so wildly disproportionate, so reliant on torture and torment, so infinite in its scope that it cannot possibly be a fair response to whatever it is that someone supposedly sinned about. And especially when that torture seems to be tied much more to, well, what is your faith, rather than did you actually do good or bad things, then it doesn't seem that Christianity has an end times where everything is made just where everyone who believed gets all the good things and people who didn't believe get all the bad things. And while we're at it, this was in fact not the only genocide in the Old Testament. The Midianites were also ordered to be killed, except in that time, they weren't just told to kill everyone. They were told to kill all the males, but, quote, female virgins should be kept for yourself. So I think there were in fact more times than that.
Yeah, back on the other thing about the hell part and the guarantee of ultimate justice. I think, we can't guarantee ultimate justice. I think that's a good thing to some extent, right? The fact that there's not some external force outside of ourselves that guarantees that no matter what we do, no matter what systems we enact, no matter how we treat others, justice will be perfectly distributed. I think the idea that we can strive towards making ultimate justice rather than just expecting that it will come about regardless of our actions, I think that is really important towards building systems which actually can give us justice in this world.
MCU?
The next question for the MCU is there a way for Christianity to provide an incentive for active justice?
Yes, there is. And that is actually really nicely tied into what we finished that question with, which I wanted to respond to. The incentive for active justice under Christianity is what we have seen in the history of the Western world. And all those things I listed off in my opening statement, fighting for women's rights, ending slavery, William Wilberforce, emancipation, like starting universities, starting hospitals, looking after the elderly, looking after the poor, Christian charity, none of those things were normal ideals back then. And that's so hard for us to imagine because we live in a world where those things are just taken for granted. But we have to accredit them to Christianity. And there were Christians at the forefront of every single one of those pioneers for change in society, for social justice. And the thing that propelled them forward to do what they did and to fight against injustice, sometimes to their own detriment and their own harm, the thing that compelled them to do that was the Christian framework of justice that says everyone is made equal in the image of God. Everybody deserves those rights. And that's not something that we can just sit on our backsides and accept. That's something that as Christians we are propelled forward to do. And so when somebody is a Christian and they've accepted Christ in their life, the call on their life when they call themselves Christian is to imitate Christ and to follow Christ. And we believe that he lived a perfect life, which cannot be disproved by history. I don't think any historical document would record that Christ did not live a perfect life. Jesus lived a perfect life and we are called to follow him. And when we call ourselves Christian, we take on that responsibility. And that, I might add, is actually something that will come into judgment at the end of time. For those Christians who have committed atrocities and they've taken God's word and said, this is what it says, and they've used it knowingly, not in good faith, to do things for their own selfish gain and hurting others, they will have to answer for that at the end of time. God doesn't just let that slide. But the change of the heart that happens when you become a Christian and you surrender your life to God, repenting of all the things you've done wrong and the ways you've rejected God.
Final sentences.
That is what happens when you become a Christian. That's the responsibility you take on, and that is arguably the best way to compel people to fight for what is right, because they have a foundation to stand on as they go forward in that, which we believe that secularism does not provide that foundation.
MPS, a two-parter that builds on one another. If society and moral imperative are what you judge a justice system by, what stops this from just being controlled by those in power? And how can a past justice system be judged when it may have been accepted by those at the time, if there is no objective source of justice?
So I don't think we're trying to say that, we're judging a system. Well, secular justice is not just whatever the legal system is today, right? I think the secular justice we've put forward is a framework, a way for understanding justice, and it has principles that probably contradict some of the things in our system today, right? I think there are things that happen in our world which are arbitrary, which are disproportionate to the crime, and I think insofar these exist, we wish they were different. On the second part, what was the second part?
How can we say that the past was wrong?
Oh yeah. So how can we say the past was wrong if the people living in that time accepted it to be part of their reality? I've got two parts to this. I think the first part is that, we look at, I'm sure there were some people who were very much on board with the genocides of the Amalekites, but I'm going to guess that the Amalekites were not one of them, right? I think, the people perpetrating the genocide, benefiting from the law that lets them kill others and take their land. I'm sure they were very happy with that at the time. I think you'll find a lot of people, namely the people who were being killed, namely the babies who were being killed, I think they would not say they were so happy with the justice system at the time.
How do we stop justice being just a tool of oppression by the powerful? Well, this requires a lot of work on the part of every other human being who can come together and see that injustice and say, we need to do something about it. We need to organize ourselves. We need to find ways to protest that and to try and change those systems. I would suggest that in order to do that, you must build cross-cultural coalitions with people of many different faiths, something that would be impossible if that process of resisting that power could only come from a Christian origin. So the process of trying to change and improve justice in our society has to come from a secular place, because that way you can rally the most people towards that by explaining to them why there is an injustice and how you want to fix it. And that's probably going to be something that, is good and is the only way that we could fix that. And I don't think that it's okay to just say, well, we won't have to build those coalitions because in the end, God will make it all right anyway. The problem is that before you get to end times, there is all the other times and all the suffering that occurs there. And if you want to stop the suffering in this world, you are going to have to actually do the work, which means you have to go through the secular tools that we have talked about.
Right. For the MCU, why is forgiveness important to justice? Isn't forgiveness in itself not just?
That's a really good question. Why is forgiveness important to justice? I'll answer that part first. Part of what I touched on in my point about forgiveness in my opening statement was that forgiveness means that we don't have to fight violence with violence, and we don't have to take revenge, and we don't have to hold grudges, which often hurt the person who holds the grudge more than they actually hurt the person who's done the wrong. And Christianity provides a freedom for us to let go of that hurt and that pain and to forgive someone for a wrong they've committed against us. And the question of, is that just? Does that seem unjust? Like if somebody goes unpunished for a wrong that they have done, you could ask the question, isn't it more just that we repay them an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, like what they have done to somebody else, may that be done against them? Is that justice? Well, I think the Bible says, yes, it is. That is what you deserve. That is what we deserve when we reject God and cut ourselves off from the sustainer of all life. What we deserve is eternity without God. And I think that is God's view of justice. That is just. But what enables the capacity for forgiveness is Jesus' death and resurrection. And when Jesus died on the cross, justice was done. But it wasn't done to the people that deserved it. It wasn't done to us. God himself took that punishment for us out of love. And as Will said in his statement, that is the only way to hold perfect justice and perfect love in tangent. If you say, oh, it doesn't matter, don't worry, I know you did the wrong thing and you broke the one rule that I told you not to break, but I'm just going to overlook it, turn a blind eye. That's not justice. That's a God of love who's like a grandfather God and doesn't punish anyone for what they've done, doesn't give people what they deserve. Instead, he pays for the punishment and the punishment is dealt out, but he takes that on himself, which means that we go free. And knowing as a Christian that you have been forgiven, as the story about Corrie ten Boom demonstrated, knowing that you've been forgiven and set free when that was not what you deserved, and it's only by God's grace that he has given you that love, that is what enables Christians to forgive others. And secularism has nothing that even comes close to a reason for, at that level, why you should forgive other people. But I think that answers the question of how justice and forgiveness can be held in tangent and are actually quite linked together. Hopefully that answers it.
MPS, staying on the topic of forgiveness, what would be the motivation for forgiveness under secularism? How could Corrie ten Boom forgive that Nazi knowing that he hadn't been punished and probably wouldn't be?
So I think a couple of things are important here. When you are acting in in order to build a more just, fairer society, sometimes that does require forgiving because you recognize that not everything is, like, not all culpability is centered on the individual. Sometimes society pushes people in certain ways, and that those can be rational parts of how we discuss what should be forgiven and what shouldn't. Or perhaps people have genuinely committed to processes of rehabilitation. And again, you would look at that and you would assess it rationally to determine whether or not they should be forgiven. When it comes to the particular example of one person absolving a Nazi concentration camp guard for the millions of people that guard assisted and was complicit in murdering, I don't think that person should have the right to forgive them on behalf of all those people. I would also point out that 5 minutes ago, the Christian Union was telling us that if you did a cynical wrong, you'll be put in hell and punished forever. But now apparently, no, everyone gets forgiveness and mercy and grace. I once again do not know what it is that actually gets you in or out of hell, except just faith. Just you're deciding that these books are good books and you like the people in them. And I don't think that that is justice. I think that that's bizarre and weird, and I don't want a part of it. And apparently, because I don't want to be a part of it, I also deserve to be tortured. I don't think this is justice. And I think the claim that you can require this of me and then say you love me is a perversion of what love is. Thanks.
To the MCU. The ideas of justice that you claim to begin with Christianity have also been found in religions from continents outside Europe that are as old or older than Christianity, such as Taoism and Buddhism, which both suggest that you should love thy neighbor and encourage attitudes of forgiveness to all. Why must they be converted to Christianity or suffer in hell for eternity just because they have a different faith, despite similarities in morals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just to clarify, the question is like, how do these sort of other systems have very similar principles? You know, why is Christianity kind of different? Is that kind of idea? Yeah. Why should they be punished? Is this so like divine punishment as well? Right, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so like, I think we need to clarify this kind of idea of divine punishment because I think it's been quite misconstrued in this debate. So I think the reason why it's proportional is because of how good God is. And that sounds very paradoxical, right? So it sounds paradoxical because of how good God is, that's how bad sin is, because it's separation from infinite goodness. And anything that's less than infinite goodness is like kind of by nature infinite bad. And that actually like is technically proportional when you let that resonate in your mind. And it sounds weird and it's binary, right? But by no merit can we ever get there. And that's why grace is different. That's why Christianity is different. Because grace is exclusive to Christianity. And that says, yes, if we claim there's an infinite God, which we do, there is no way we can get there. The only way that we can do this is if we accept the gift that he's given us. And if we don't accept that gift, God's not going to force us to accept that gift. But nevertheless, he respects it. Like, yeah, that's like what we're given. So to do like the Taoism, and I'm not sure what it was, Confucianism, like, yeah, so these kind of ideas were actually very hierarchical. And so there was this idea of like, yeah, you like trust people in the same hierarchy, but those below your hierarchy, you don't really treat the same. Christianity is radical because Jesus says you should love thy neighbor because for everything that you're doing to your neighbor, you're doing to me because they are made in my image. And he says, I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick in prison and you did not look after me. What you've done for the least of my brothers, you have done for me. There is no hierarchy. Everyone is one in Christ, neither slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile. This equality is actually radical. Like all these things had hierarchies. And that's not to say that moral principles, can't be extracted. Because yeah, we do have these basic ideas of rights and wrongs, but they're insubstantial. It's an incomplete narrative without Christ. Because we don't, because our baser natures override these, they overrun, and there's nothing constant that keeps it there. There's no reason why we should why we should value other people, why we should listen to these philosophies. Why should one person's rationale justify another? Why should we not do eugenics? Because it sounds like the rational thing to do. And that's what, a lot of people did do, in fact. There's nothing stopping that unless you say they're made in the divine image.
Okay, there we go. That's my job made easy. We're going to move on to our final question now, and this is going to be asked to both sides of the debate.
We'll go MPS with the answer first. Which argument from the other side did you find the most compelling?
So generally speaking, when we ask a question, that requires silence so it can be answered. So I invite MPS to speak now.
I think the ideas of grace and forgiveness, I think these are the most beautiful parts of the Christian narrative of justice. And I think, if anything is convincing, it is, the innate part of us that yearns for like those sorts of things, that for forgiveness, for grace, for our actions. I also think the image of God presented, the image of Jesus, this figure of someone who comes down to bear your punishments for himself. I think that's a really beautiful idea. That's what I enjoyed about the speeches.
I think the idea that there can be a much easier way that we can get to the desire to be good to one another and the desire to value one another, like I too want that. And I would love it if that was the case. Yeah.
I think the thing that I found most compelling about your argument was that you hold reason and empathy to a very high regard. I don't think all secular systems do that, but I think the framework that you've put forward really does uphold those human qualities, which I think are really beautiful. And though we disagree on the origin of those, I think it does present a compelling case how highly you regard those human qualities and how highly you value them.
Yeah, I echoed that as well. Like I'll add something else, but like I think like everything that you've said about reason, empathy, proportionality being explainable to people, I think we completely agree on that. I think we also can agree on like the judicial system. So like we're not claiming like it's like a church and state should be the same. Like yeah, the judicial system should learn from its mistakes and it should use this with reason and empathy. But I'd also like to give another compliment, and that I think we have to reconcile this idea of like how can an unjust world be if there is a just God, and that is the age-old question, and that's the question that is reverberated through the Bible and it's reverberated in this debate today. And it's very difficult to reconcile because, of course, we in our limited ability and our limited perception of justice, we ascribe that to God, who is, infinite in all things. And I think it's very difficult, and we should continue in these discussions to help do that together.
Debaters, thank you very much. Guys, thank you very much for asking your questions. However, if this has worked up an appetite inside of you to stay till midnight to talk, well, good thing for you, you can, because there'll be time afterwards. For the last 4 or so years, MPS, MCU, we've been running this every single year. To bring you this debate, it's a team event. We organise it together. So now, just a quick, as we finish, we'll invite up the presidents for both societies to come and give a quick word. So we'll invite Gracie from MCU up first.
Everyone say hello. Everyone say hello. Oh, it's so funny. That's also silly. Hi, everybody. I'm Gracie, and it's been my joy and delight to be Monash CU president for the past 11 years. Months. I've deferred a lot. 11 months. And yeah, I'm at the front tonight to talk to you about Christian Union. I'll share with you a bit about what CU does, but first, I want to talk about Jesus. Now, a bit of context, I am a massive people pleaser. Like if you had mud on the bottom of your shoes and I just got new white sneakers and then you stepped on my new white shoes, I would apologize to you. That's kind of how I am. And I find it really difficult to disagree with people, and I find it really difficult to say hot takes. But I also want to say this. I believe that the gospel is true, and I believe that I'm not a good person, and I believe that I need a savior, and I really, really believe that Jesus is that savior. And I really do think that Jesus lived the life I could not live, and I really believe that he did die, taking the punishment that I deserve, and that he was buried after 3 days, and then he came back to life. And I really do believe that I don't have to fear death or isolation or failure. And that the best thing that you could do as well is put your faith in Jesus. And that it makes me really nervous to say in front of a crowd like this. And it's not the most popular belief, but I have to say it because I really do believe it. And I'm just going to put people on the spot now. Can you put your hand up if you believe everything that I just said? Wow. Interesting. So if you're confused as to why so many people believe that, or you have more questions about who this Jesus guy is, or you still have questions about the Bible or about justice or about Christianity, then Monash CU will be having a post-CU debate, a post-debate Q&A. Wait, Hope, when is that?
It is next week, Tuesday.
Next week, what time?
At 5 p.m. No, actually, to be decided.
Decided.
Based on your availability.
Cool. So scan the QR code and then you'll get more information about that. That's the main thing. Also, side note, if you do want to check out Monash CU, then you can come along to CU Hub, and it kind of looks kind of like, oh wow, it's so funny how every time it does that thing, it kind of looks like that. There's an arrow there that shows you what it looks like. It's on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. It's going to happen a lot. It's on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. And whoa, it's in here. What? It's literally in this room in South One Lecture Theatre. And whoa, it's doing it again. Here are some things that we do. We sing, we read the Bible, we talk, we listen to a talk. A book of the Bible called 1 Corinthians. It's a letter to the church. So come along if you're interested. We pray and we also eat. And then, oh yeah, can I get if you're a CUer and you'll be there on Tuesday night, say get in. Awesome. So go to one of those people that said get in if you want more information. And you can look on our socials or on our link tree if you also want more information. Also, thank you to the 4 legendary debaters. Thank you to the immaculate moderator. And thank you to the outstanding MCs. It's been an awesome night. That's all.
Thank you, Gracie. And I would like to invite James up to speak on behalf of MPS.
Sorry, I didn't realise this was off. I just want to begin firstly by giving a big thanks to our friends at Monash Christian Union. I was MPS's president back when this all began in 2022. Really happy to see that it's still going strong after 4 years, and here's to many more to come. All right, so I've got a question for you all in the audience here. A lot of you, all right. Well, I can promise you if you join MPS, it'll be the perfect opportunity to relive your glory days. And even if you haven't, right, like university is a great time to try new things. You might want to dip your toes into it, see what it's like, right? No, but in all seriousness, though, yes, we might have that existential dread behind all those smiles you're seeing there, but we do have a lot of fun as well. And I don't know how many clubs meet weekly, but we do meet weekly on Thursday nights to, have a cup of tea, talk about, a wide range of topics, not just on philosophy of religion, but anything you can think of, right? Like ethics, philosophy of mind. Look, the list goes on, right? We have a few other things that we offer. I'll just try to keep it brief, right? So we've got our book club, which we've been running for a long time. You'll have to ask for Andrew's permission, though, if you want to join. But I'm sure he will say yes. Yeah. Okay, there you go. So you've got Andrew's approval. Sometimes we have guest speakers as well, and we try to mix it up where we can with other fun social events, whether they're like trivia nights, games. Sometimes we have the occasional movie as well. Our main event, as many of you would know, which we run most Thursdays, is Philosophy and Tea. And I'm excited to say that next Thursday we'll have a little follow-up discussion, which will be featuring our very own Josh and Andrew. So if you have any burning questions for them, or if you want to step in MCU shoes next Thursday and actually debate them face-to-face, well, next Thursday will be your opportunity to do so. We'll be meeting at Monash Whole Foods from 5 p.m. And if you like what we have to sell, we'll also be, we'll be doing our discussion the following Thursday on philosophy of music, followed then by our AGM, which for any of you in the audience who are already a member of MPS, please do come along to our AGM. If you like what we do, if you maybe want to get involved and join our committee, that will be your perfect opportunity to do so. And hopefully, we might even have a movie night mid-sem break, but we'll keep you posted on that. All right, so just one last thing from me. If you are not already a member of MPS and you'd like to, be part of the community, we are always looking to grow, to welcome new members. So I would like to invite you, if you are interested, and I hope that most of you are, I'd like to invite you to scan the QR code and sign up. So it'd be great to see more of you around at our events. Where we're a pretty chill group. We always welcome new people, and it would be really great to see more new faces there as well. So I'll probably just leave it at that, and I'll just say, yeah, thank you again, and thank you again to our longtime friends from Monash Christian Union for making this happen for a 4th year in a row. Thanks, guys.
Well, that brings us to the end of the formal part of our debate for tonight. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Can we please have a big round of applause for our debaters? And for our moderator, Salome.
Final thank you. Please thank our MCs as well.
Guys, we'd love to invite you. There are Krispy Kreme donuts. There is tea. But more so, stay around, talk to your friends. Have a good night.